He was a homeless former U.S. Navy SEAL, and after 18 years of service, he believed life had already taken everything worth fighting for. No family waiting, no place to call home, just an aging Ford F-150, a faded red flannel shirt, painful memories of fallen teammates, a knee that never fully healed, and Rex, the loyal German shepherd who had stood beside him through every battle. Then, on a quiet summer morning outside Decorah, Iowa, fate intervened. As Logan drove along a narrow rural highway, a fully loaded logging truck coming the opposite direction suddenly lurched out of control. One enormous timber broke loose, bouncing violently across the pavement straight toward his pickup. Logan had only a split second to react. Tires screamed against the asphalt. The steering wheel jerked from his hands. Metal twisted. Glass exploded. The truck rolled toward the roadside ditch as dust and shattered wood filled the air. And then, everything went silent. What happened in the next few minutes would not only decide whether Logan lived or died, it would uncover a forgotten family legacy that had remained hidden for generations. Before we begin, if stories of faith, loyal dogs, hope, and second chances speak to your heart, please subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to welcome you to our community. Early summer sunlight settled gently across the rolling hills outside Decorah, Iowa. A light breeze carried the scent of damp earth through abandoned fields, where stones outnumbered grass, while the quiet countryside seemed unaware that one ordinary morning was about to change several lives forever. Logan Carter tightened both hands around the worn steering wheel of his aging blue Ford F-150 as the truck climbed another gentle hill. At 42, he still carried the powerful frame that 18 years as a U.S. Navy SEAL had carved into his body, although hardship had stripped away much of its strength. He stood about 6'1", broad-shouldered, with weathered skin darkened by years beneath unforgiving suns in distant deserts and mountains. His dark brown hair remained cropped short out of old habit, while a neatly trimmed beard connected to his mustache framed a face marked by quiet endurance instead of pride. A thin scar crossed his left eyebrow. Another faded scar traced along his right forearm, and every few miles his damaged left knee reminded him that war rarely ended when soldiers came home. He wore the same clothes almost every day, a red plaid flannel shirt beneath a worn brown canvas jacket, faded dark blue jeans, brown hiking boots, and an old military wristwatch whose scratched crystal had somehow survived everything life had thrown at him. Beside him sat Rex. The 9-year-old German shepherd had once served as Logan's military working dog during the final years of his career. Age had silvered the fur around Rex's muzzle, but little else betrayed retirement. His muscular body remained solid. His ears stood proudly upright, except for a small notch along the left one, and his warm amber eyes constantly watched both the road ahead and the man beside him. Around his neck hung an old brown leather collar with a small metal name tag that clicked softly whenever the truck bounced over rough pavement. Rex rarely barked without reason. Years of disciplined training had taught him patience, while countless missions beside Logan had created something stronger than obedience. They understood each other through silence. For nearly a year, the truck had been their only home. A folded blanket behind the seats served as a bed. Plastic storage bins held every remaining possession Logan owned. His backpack, a small camping stove, several cans of soup, work gloves, a toolbox, and a faded photograph from another life occupied nearly every available inch. He had once commanded dangerous missions with absolute confidence. Now he drove from one farm to another, asking whether anyone needed temporary labor. That contrast never stopped hurting. Some mornings Logan woke before sunrise, convinced he was still overseas. The smell of smoke, the sound of helicopters, the faces of men who never returned, all visited him before reality slowly caught up. His first commanding officer had been killed during Logan's earliest deployment. 3 men who had later become his closest friends never returned from Afghanistan. Logan had survived them all, yet survival often felt less like victory than unfinished responsibility. PTSD was not the loud explosion people imagined. Sometimes it was simply an ordinary morning that suddenly became unbearably quiet. Rex sensed those moments without needing words. The dog gently rested one paw against Logan's leg. "I'm all right," Logan whispered, though both of them knew he wasn't entirely telling the truth. Today's destination was another family farm outside Decorah. Someone had mentioned seasonal fence repairs might be available. It would not pay much, but honest work always mattered more to Logan than charity. A curve approached. Beyond it climbed a logging truck carrying freshly cut timber. Everything happened almost instantly. One massive log shifted unexpectedly, despite its restraints. It rolled sideways, crashed against another, and dropped directly into Logan's lane. Training took over before fear could. Logan jerked the steering wheel sharply. The truck avoided the falling timber, but its right tires left the pavement. Loose gravel disappeared beneath the wheels. The pickup slid sideways, crossed a shallow ditch, struck uneven ground, and came to rest nose first against a cluster of large rocks below the roadside embankment. Silence lasted only a heartbeat. Then white smoke began rising from beneath the hood. Logan tried opening the driver's door. It would not move. Pain shot through his left leg. The dashboard had shifted during the impact, trapping his knee. He pulled harder. Nothing. The smell of hot metal and leaking fluids filled the cabin. Rex immediately sprang into action. Instead of panicking, the old shepherd climbed across the seats, grabbed the loose shoulder strap of Logan's seatbelt with his teeth, and pulled until the damaged latch released. Logan leaned forward, coughing violently as smoke thickened around them. "Go," he ordered between coughs. Rex hesitated only long enough to make certain Logan was still conscious. Then he squeezed through the broken passenger window and disappeared uphill toward the highway. Logan watched the empty opening through blurred vision. His chest tightened. Not from fear, from helplessness. For the first time in years, there was nothing his training could accomplish. No tactical decision, no escape route, no teammate to protect. Only waiting. Several hundred yards away, an aging white pickup slowed as a German shepherd suddenly ran into the roadway, barking insistently. Its driver, Harold Jensen, immediately hit the brakes. Harold was 68, tall and lean with silver hair beneath a faded baseball cap, and deep lines carved by decades of farming Iowa soil. Quiet by nature, he rarely ignored unusual behavior in animals because experience had taught him they noticed danger long before people did. Beside him sat his wife, Margaret Jensen, 65, shorter than Harold, with gentle blue eyes, shoulder-length gray hair tied loosely behind her neck, and sun-weathered hands that reflected a lifetime spent beside her husband. Neighbors knew Margaret as someone who never drove past stranded travelers without stopping. "That dog wants us to follow him," she said softly. Harold looked once toward Rex. The shepherd had already started running back toward the ditch before stopping again to make sure they were following. "I think you're right." Within moments, Harold had called emergency services, while both he and Margaret climbed carefully toward the wrecked truck. "Sir, can you hear me?" Harold shouted. Logan answered with a weak cough. Smoke continued pouring from beneath the hood. The elderly couple never hesitated. Harold worked the damaged passenger door while Margaret stayed beside Logan, speaking calmly, reminding him to stay awake until rescue crews arrived. Minutes later, firefighters reached the crash site, cut away twisted metal, stabilized the truck, and carefully freed Logan's trapped leg before carrying him toward the waiting ambulance. As paramedics closed the ambulance doors, Rex quietly jumped inside without waiting for permission. Nobody asked him to leave. Several hours later, Logan slowly opened his eyes beneath bright hospital lights. His head ached. His knee throbbed. Rex lay asleep beside the hospital bed, one paw resting against the blanket exactly as he had done countless nights before. Then someone knocked gently. A woman wearing a navy blazer entered, carrying a weathered envelope. "My name is Laura Whitmore," she said. "I'm the attorney handling your Uncle Benjamin Carter's estate." Logan frowned. "I don't understand." Laura placed the envelope into his hands. "He asked me to deliver this only if you were still alive." Logan unfolded the yellowed paper. The first sentence stopped his breathing. "If you're reading this, Logan, someone up there has decided you deserve one more chance." He turned the page. The second paragraph made even less sense than the first. 3 days later, warm sunlight spread across the limestone hills surrounding Decorah as bird song drifted over the quiet countryside, making the abandoned property appear almost peaceful despite decades of neglect. Logan Carter parked his repaired Ford F-150 beside a weather-beaten wooden fence whose rails leaned in every direction. The truck still carried fresh scratches from the accident, and every creak of its frame reminded him how narrowly fate had spared him. His injured knee remained stiff, forcing him to favor his right leg with every step. Yet he refused to lean on the cane the hospital had offered. Pain had become an old companion long before Iowa entered his life. Rex jumped down first. The 9-year-old German shepherd slowly walked a wide circle around the truck before stopping beside Logan. His ears stood high, his amber eyes carefully scanning every inch of unfamiliar ground. Years of military service had never completely disappeared from the old dog. Retirement had slowed his pace, but not his instincts. Logan unfolded the worn survey map Laura Whitmore had included with Benjamin Carter's documents. "Carter's Hollow." The words sounded almost forgotten. Before him stretched nearly 5 acres that looked as though nature itself had surrendered. Limestone boulders covered much of the land. Thick patches of stubborn weeds reached almost to his knees. Yellow grass struggled to survive in soil bleached pale by years of acidity. Numerous shallow depressions held stagnant rainwater that reflected the bright morning sky like broken mirrors scattered across the field. Small frogs leaped between muddy pools, while dragonflies hovered above the water. Nothing about the property suggested prosperity. No wonder nobody wanted it. Logan slowly walked deeper into the land. His Navy SEAL training had taught him to observe before acting. Without thinking, he mentally divided the property into sectors, noting elevation changes, drainage patterns, prevailing wind direction, tree cover, and natural water flow. Even after years away from military service, his mind still organized unfamiliar terrain like an operational map. "This corner floods every spring," he quietly muttered to himself after noticing dark water stains on several rocks. He crouched carefully, rubbing loose soil between his fingers. Too acidic. His disappointment lasted only a moment. Problems could be solved. That belief had carried him through far worse places than an abandoned Iowa field. Rex wandered farther ahead. Instead of chasing rabbits or sniffing every bush, the old shepherd followed the edges of the property with deliberate precision. Occasionally he paused, lifted his nose toward the breeze, then continued moving. Logan smiled faintly. "You still think you're on patrol?" Rex answered by glancing back only once, before continuing his inspection. Near the centers of the property stood the remains of an old stone foundation, almost swallowed by weeds. Only waist-high walls remained where a farmhouse had apparently stood decades earlier. Logan rested one hand on the rough limestone blocks. Someone had once built an entire life here. Children had probably laughed across these fields. Harvests had been celebrated. Families had gathered around fireplaces during cold Iowa winters. Now only silence remained. As afternoon approached, Logan pitched his old canvas tent beside a large oak tree overlooking the highest section of the property. The tree offered shade, visibility, and slightly higher ground should rain arrive. Military habits again. He organized supplies with practiced efficiency: food, water, medical kit, flashlight, tools. Everything had its place, everything except his thoughts. That evening, the quiet became almost overwhelming. There were no passing cars, no city lights, no neighbors, only wind moving through tall weeds. Logan heated canned stew over a small camping stove, while Rex patiently waited nearby. "You know," Logan said softly, stirring the pot, "this place reminds me of something." Rex lifted his head. "Not Afghanistan." Logan paused. "Home." The realization surprised him. Not because Carter's Hollow looked welcoming. It didn't. But because nobody expected anything from him here. No interviews, no explanations, no pity. Just land, broken land. Much like himself. Night arrived beneath a sky crowded with brilliant stars. Logan had almost forgotten how many stars existed beyond city lights. He lay inside the tent while Rex settled immediately outside the entrance, exactly where he had slept during countless deployments years earlier. Sleep came quickly. Peace did not. Within an hour, Logan's breathing became uneven. The nightmare returned. Dust, gunfire, radio static, someone shouting for a medic, another explosion, faces, always the same faces. His first commanding officer collapsing before Logan could reach him, 3 teammates disappearing into smoke. Then silence. Logan suddenly jerked awake, breathing hard. His hands instinctively searched for a rifle that no longer existed. For several long seconds he couldn't remember where he was. Then something warm pressed gently against his shaking hand. Rex. The old shepherd had quietly entered the tent. Without making a sound, he rested his head across Logan's knee. His steady breathing slowly replaced the chaos still echoing inside Logan's mind. "I'm here," Logan whispered. Whether he meant himself or the dog, even he wasn't certain. Morning arrived with fresh determination. Logan spent hours walking the property again, this time carrying a notebook. He measured approximate slopes using simple surveying techniques he had learned years earlier while supporting engineering units during overseas operations. He sketched drainage routes and marked areas suitable for future gardens if the soil could eventually be improved. Every problem became another project. Every obstacle became another mission. By late afternoon, Rex had disappeared into the northern section of the property, where scattered limestone formations rose above waist height. Logan continued writing. Then barking shattered the silence. Not ordinary barking. Sharp. Repeated. Focused. Logan immediately looked up. Rex stood nearly 70 yards away beside an enormous flat limestone slab, almost completely hidden beneath weeds and tangled vines. The dog wasn't leaving. Instead, he repeatedly scratched one exact spot with both front paws before stopping to bark directly toward Logan. "What did you find?" Logan limped across the uneven ground as quickly as his injured knee allowed. The closer he came, the stranger everything appeared. The slab looked unusually almost placed there. He knelt beside Rex. Brushing away years of dirt and tangled roots with both hands, his fingers suddenly touched something that definitely did not belong beneath ordinary stone. Cold. Smooth. Iron. Logan looked at Rex. The old shepherd quietly wagged his tail once. Then Logan uncovered the unmistakable outline of what looked like a rusted metal ring embedded beneath the edge of the massive limestone slab. He had no idea why a lifting ring would exist in the middle of an abandoned field. But for the first time since arriving at Carter's Hollow, he no longer believed the land was empty. Morning sunlight poured across Carter's Hollow, casting long golden beams over limestone boulders and dew-covered weeds, while the quiet field seemed to guard a secret that had remained untouched for generations. Logan Carter knelt beside the massive limestone slab, with dirt covering both hands and sweat soaking through the collar of his red flannel shirt. The rusted iron ring he had uncovered the previous afternoon was real. It wasn't part of an old farming tool or abandoned machinery. It had been forged directly into the underside of the stone. Beside him, Rex stood perfectly still, ears forward and eyes fixed on Logan instead of the surrounding field. The old German shepherd had stopped barking altogether, almost as if instinct told him they were standing at the edge of something important. Logan tested the iron ring. It barely moved. The limestone slab was far heavier than he had expected. He returned to his truck and gathered every tool he owned: a long steel pry bar, an old shovel, a hand pick, a small bottle jack, heavy work gloves, and 2 short lengths of chain. 18 years of military service had taught him that brute strength usually failed where preparation succeeded. For nearly 4 hours, he worked methodically. He removed compacted soil around the stone. He cleared thick roots that had wrapped themselves underneath its edges. He carefully inserted the pry bar, raising one corner only a fraction of an inch before placing flat rocks underneath to keep it from settling again. Every movement demanded patience. Every movement punished his injured knee. More than once, pain forced him to stop. Each time Rex quietly walked over and rested against Logan's shoulder until the pain eased enough for him to continue. "You never did like quitting," Logan said with a tired smile. Rex answered with one slow wag of his tail. Finally, as the afternoon sun reached directly overhead, the stone shifted farther than before. A hollow sound echoed beneath it. Logan froze. Solid earth did not sound like that. Using the bottle jack together with the pry bar, he slowly raised one side high enough to slide the slab several inches across its stone supports. A rush of cool, dry air escaped from below. Not the damp smell of buried soil, not stagnant water. Dry air. Air that had somehow remained sealed away for decades. Logan crouched and brushed away more dirt. Beneath the slab appeared carefully carved limestone steps disappearing into darkness. Someone had built this. Deliberately. Rex looked toward the opening, then back at Logan, waiting for permission. "Easy," Logan whispered. He switched on his flashlight before descending first. Old habits. Never send your partner into unknown danger. The staircase descended nearly 15 feet before ending inside a surprisingly large underground chamber. Thick limestone walls surrounded the room. Massive timber beams supported the ceiling, and despite their obvious age, they remained remarkably straight. Whoever had built the cellar understood craftsmanship. The beam of Logan's flashlight swept slowly across the chamber. Shelves, wooden crates, iron farming tools, barrels, clay jars. Everything rested beneath a thick layer of dust, yet almost nothing showed signs of water damage. The room had stayed astonishingly dry. Near the far wall stood a heavy oak chest reinforced with black iron straps. Its lock had long ago rusted away. Logan hesitated. He wasn't thinking about treasure. He was thinking about history. Carefully lifting the lid, he stared inside without speaking. Row after row of neatly stacked gold coins reflected the narrow beam of his flashlight. They weren't scattered carelessly. Someone had counted them. organized them, protected them. Logan picked up a single coin. It felt surprisingly heavy. Years of military deployments had taken him through museums, ancient cities, and archaeological sites around the world. He knew enough to recognize that these coins were genuinely old. He immediately placed it back exactly where he had found it. "This doesn't belong to me yet," he quietly said. Beside the chest rested several wooden boxes containing beautifully preserved farming tools, unlike anything Logan had ever used. Hand-forged hoes, seed drills, pruning knives, leather harness fittings, and measuring instruments had all been wrapped in linen cloth that time had somehow spared. On a small writing desk near the back of the cellar lay a leather-bound journal protected beneath waxed canvas. The first page carried a single name: Jacob Carter. Below it appeared the date: 1789. Logan carefully sat on an old stool before opening the journal. The handwriting remained remarkably clear. Jacob wrote about arriving in the Iowa Territory long before permanent settlement had transformed the land. He described endless labor breaking limestone by hand, draining marshes, and trying to grow crops where nearly every neighbor insisted farming was impossible. Every page reflected determination instead of complaint. Then the journal changed. A severe drought, crop failures, disease, financial hardship. Jacob explained that over many difficult years, he had secretly accumulated 200 gold coins, not to become wealthy, but to finance the complete restoration of Carter's Hollow once better times returned. Those better times never came. Before illness claimed his life, he hid both the savings and his farming equipment beneath the stone cellar so future generations might finish what he could not. Logan reached the final pages. His heartbeat slowed. The last paragraph seemed written directly to him, despite more than 2 centuries separating them. "If my blood still walks this land one day, remember this: gold can build barns, gold can buy seed, but only character can make this ground worth calling home. Do not sell this land for quick comfort. Let this place save you, just as building it once saved me." Logan quietly lowered the journal. For several minutes, he simply stared at the weathered pages. His Uncle Benjamin had known. That explained everything. Benjamin had never sold the property because he had been protecting far more than abandoned farmland. He had been protecting hope. Logan slowly closed the journal and carefully returned every item exactly as he had found it. Nothing left the cellar. Not one coin. Not one tool. Instead, he took dozens of photographs with his phone and carefully mapped the chamber's layout in his notebook. Military discipline again. Document first. Act later. As evening approached, Logan and Rex climbed back into the fading sunlight. The old shepherd sat beside the limestone slab, quietly watching his owner. Logan scratched behind Rex's ears before looking across the neglected field, stretching toward the horizon. "I thought surviving the war would be the hardest mission I'd ever have," he said softly. Rex leaned against his leg. Logan smiled for the first time in many months. "Maybe this is the last mission they were preparing us for." The breeze carried his words across Carter's Hollow, while the setting sun painted the abandoned field in warm shades of gold. For the first time since becoming homeless, Logan wasn't wondering how to survive tomorrow. He was wondering how to rebuild an entire future. The first week of June brought clear blue skies and warm sunlight to Carter's Hollow, where the neglected field looked unchanged to passing travelers. Yet beneath its quiet surface, the future of the Carter family had already begun to awaken. Logan Carter covered the limestone slab once more before leaving the underground cellar. He carefully spread the original soil back across its edges, arranged loose rocks exactly as he had found them, and allowed weeds to fall naturally over the entrance. Years of military reconnaissance had taught him that the best hiding place was one that appeared completely ordinary. Only Rex watched the process from a few yards away, sitting patiently beneath the old oak tree, as if silently agreeing that some secrets deserved protection. The next morning, Logan drove into Decorah with a notebook full of measurements instead of dreams. He had spent the previous night studying Jacob Carter's journal again, making lists of everything the farm would eventually require. He refused to touch a single gold coin until the cellar itself could be properly secured. Benjamin Carter had trusted him with the family's greatest secret, and Logan intended to honor that trust. His first stop was a small blacksmith shop on the edge of town. The rhythmic sound of hammer striking steel echoed through the open doorway long before Logan stepped inside. Elias Vance looked up from his anvil. At 58, Elias possessed the broad chest and powerful forearms of a man who had spent nearly 4 decades shaping iron with his own hands. His thick gray beard reached halfway down his neck, while short salt and pepper hair curled beneath a soot-stained leather cap. Burn marks covered his muscular arms, and permanent black stains clung to his fingers despite endless washing. Most people in Decorah respected him, not only because of his craftsmanship, but because he had quietly rebuilt his business after losing his wife to cancer 12 years earlier. Since then, work had become his way of carrying grief without allowing it to consume him. Though naturally reserved, he treated honest people with remarkable fairness. "What can I build for you?" Elias asked. Logan unfolded a simple sketch showing a heavy iron door with internal crossbars and reinforced hinges. "I need something strong enough to protect an old stone cellar." Elias studied the drawing without asking unnecessary questions. "You restoring a farm?" "I'm trying." The blacksmith smiled faintly. Trying usually becomes doing. They spent nearly an hour discussing dimensions, locking mechanisms, and how to anchor the frame into limestone walls. Logan deliberately avoided mentioning the cellar's true contents. Elias never pressed for explanations. Years of working with farmers had taught him that every family owned stories they preferred to keep private. Leaving the forge, Logan purchased only the essentials: better work gloves, new shovels, drainage pipe, grass seed, lime for improving acidic soil, and a sturdy canvas tent to replace the worn one that had sheltered him through months of homelessness. He still paid using the modest savings left in his bank account. The gold remained untouched. 2 days later, Logan visited another address written on a note Laura Whitmore had slipped into Benjamin Carter's documents. Robert Hale. Stone Mason. The small stone workshop overlooked a quiet creek outside Decorah. Robert emerged carrying a bucket of mortar. He was 69, tall but slightly stooped after decades lifting limestone blocks by hand. His deeply lined face carried the calm confidence of a craftsman who never rushed perfection. Thick white hair surrounded a mostly bald crown, while a neatly trimmed white beard softened otherwise sharp features. His blue eyes missed very little. 20 years earlier, Robert had survived a construction accident that claimed the life of his younger brother. Since then, he had become obsessive about teaching safe building practices to anyone willing to learn. "You Logan Carter?" "Yes, sir." "Benjamin wrote me about you years ago." Logan blinked. "He did?" Robert nodded. "He said one day his nephew might finally come home." The words settled heavily inside Logan's chest. Robert walked him around several stone cottages built with limestone from nearby quarries. "People think stone houses are about strength," the old mason said. "They're really about patience." Logan expected a price. Instead, Robert handed him a hammer. "If you're willing to work, I'll teach you." The following weeks became the hardest physical labor Logan had faced since leaving military service. Every morning began before sunrise. Rex faithfully accompanied him through every task. Together they cut away towering weeds that had hidden the original boundaries of Carter's Hollow. Logan dug drainage trenches to redirect standing water away from future planting areas. He separated limestone by size, stacking larger foundation stones in neat rows, while smaller pieces formed growing piles for future retaining walls. Jacob Carter's journal became his guide, while Robert's practical lessons transformed old notes into working knowledge. Although his injured knee protested constantly, Logan refused shortcuts. Each completed task felt less like construction and more like rebuilding himself. One hot afternoon, while prying loose a partially buried limestone boulder, the unstable ground suddenly shifted beneath him. The stone rolled. Logan lost his footing. His injured left leg became trapped between two rocks as his body slid into a shallow excavation trench. Pain exploded through his knee. He tried lifting the stone. It refused to move. "Rex!" The German shepherd reacted instantly. Instead of clawing uselessly at the rock, Rex circled once, looked directly into Logan's eyes, then sprinted toward the gravel road leading to Robert Hale's workshop nearly half a mile away. Logan lay still, forcing himself to breathe slowly. Military survival training reminded him that panic wasted strength. Nearly 20 minutes passed. Then he heard barking. Not frightened barking. Purposeful barking. Robert appeared moments later, breathing hard as he hurried across the field carrying a long steel digging bar. "I've never seen him act like that before," the old mason said. Together they carefully lifted the limestone, using leverage rather than force. Once Logan's leg was free, Robert helped him sit beneath the oak tree, while Rex quietly rested beside his owner, gently placing his silvered muzzle against Logan's shoulder. Robert looked at the old shepherd. "That dog didn't come asking for help." He paused. "He came giving directions." Logan smiled, despite the pain. "He always knows what matters." The old mason remained silent for a long moment before speaking again. "Benjamin was right." "About what?" Robert looked across the abandoned field that no longer seemed quite so abandoned. "He said if you ever reached Carter's Hollow, you wouldn't build a house. You'd build a life." For the first time since arriving in Iowa, Logan realized he was no longer working alone. By early autumn, Carter's Hollow no longer looked like the forgotten piece of land that locals had driven past for decades. Golden sunlight rolled across newly cleared fields where towering weeds had once hidden limestone beneath tangled brush, and every passing week revealed another small sign that hope could take root even in stubborn ground. Nearly 4 months had passed since Logan Carter first stepped onto the abandoned property. The transformation had been earned one stone at a time. Every morning began before sunrise. Logan pulled on his familiar red plaid flannel shirt, slipped into his worn brown canvas jacket, laced his brown hiking boots, and walked outside with a steaming cup of black coffee, while Rex stretched beside the front of the tent. The old German shepherd's silver muzzle had become slightly more noticeable under the autumn light, and although he no longer sprinted across open fields as he had years ago, he still insisted on making his daily patrol around the entire property before breakfast. The first walls of the cottage had begun rising from the very limestone scattered across Carter's Hollow. Robert Hale never built anything for Logan. Instead, he stood nearby with folded arms, patiently correcting every mistake. "Stone doesn't forgive impatience," the old mason often reminded him. Logan mixed mortar, reset crooked blocks, tore down sections that weren't level, then built them again. Weeks earlier, such repetition would have frustrated him. Now it felt strangely comforting. Military training had taught him that discipline meant repeating simple things correctly until excellence became ordinary. Building a house demanded exactly the same mindset, One afternoon, Logan stepped back to admire the fireplace taking shape along the western wall. His hands were rougher than ever. His shoulders ached. Yet for the first time in years, every sore muscle came from creating something instead of surviving something. Rex quietly walked over and sat beside him. "What do you think?" Logan asked. The old shepherd simply leaned against his leg. Logan laughed. "I'll take that as approval." Word gradually spread throughout Decorah. At first, people spoke about the quiet veteran restoring Benjamin Carter's abandoned field. Later, they spoke about the quality of his work. Eventually, they simply spoke about Logan. One person who quietly became part of that story was Thomas Bell. Thomas was 35 years old, broad-shouldered, with sandy blonde hair usually hidden beneath a faded baseball cap. His clean-shaven face carried an easy smile that immediately put strangers at ease. Years of delivering lumber, gravel, and farm supplies across Winneshiek County had made him familiar with nearly every family in the area. His father had taught him that reputation traveled farther than trucks ever could, so Thomas believed every customer deserved honesty, whether buying a single bag of cement or enough lumber to build a barn. Every Tuesday morning, his flatbed truck appeared at Carter's Hollow. "Lime today," he would call. "Drainage pipe next week. Lumber after that." He always unloaded every shipment exactly where Logan needed it, before refusing any extra payment for the additional effort. "You'll need the money more than I do," Thomas joked one morning. Logan shook his head. "I pay my debts." Thomas smiled. "I know." That simple answer carried unexpected respect. A few days later, another quiet routine began. Every Friday morning, someone left a warm loaf of bread wrapped in clean linen on the temporary workbench beside Logan's tent. No note, no explanation. Only fresh bread. The mystery lasted nearly 3 weeks before Logan finally caught the visitor. She introduced herself as Martha Gable. At 63, Martha possessed the kind smile that immediately reminded people of home. She stood barely 5'4", with soft gray hair pinned neatly behind her head, gentle hazel eyes, and lightly freckled skin weathered by decades spent rising before dawn to bake bread for the town. Widowed nearly 15 years earlier, she had poured her loneliness into caring for others through food rather than words. Everyone in Decorah knew that if someone fell ill or lost a loved one, Martha's bread usually arrived before sympathy cards did. "I figured a man building his own house shouldn't have to eat canned soup every night," she said with a quiet smile. Logan looked down at the warm loaf. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already are." "How?" "You're bringing Benjamin's land back to life." She gently scratched behind Rex's ears before driving away. From then on, fresh bread became another Friday tradition. As the cottage slowly grew, so did its unexpected visitors. Children riding bicycles along the nearby gravel road often stopped to watch Logan shape stone. They were fascinated by Rex. The old German shepherd never barked at them. Instead, he sat proudly near the worksite, allowing tiny hands to stroke his thick fur while accepting homemade dog biscuits one careful bite at a time. Among the children, 7-year-old Caleb Morrison visited most often. A skinny boy with messy brown hair, freckles across his nose, and endless curiosity. Caleb had recently become fascinated with construction after helping his grandfather repair an old chicken coop. "Did Rex really work in the military?" Caleb asked one afternoon. "He did." "Was he brave?" Logan looked toward his old partner. "The bravest teammate I ever had." Caleb knelt beside Rex. "I think he's still brave." Rex responded by gently licking the boy's hand. Watching them together awakened something Logan had buried for years. Before the war, before divorce, before homelessness, He remembered laughing that easily. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Logan carried a small wooden box into the unfinished cottage. Inside rested 4 military dog tags. 1 belonged to his first commanding officer. 3 belonged to the friends who never returned from Afghanistan. He carefully placed them on the unfinished stone mantel above the fireplace. "I finally found somewhere worthy of keeping you," he whispered. The cottage remained roofless, allowing the evening sky to shine overhead. For several quiet minutes, Logan simply stood there, while Rex rested beside him. The memories still hurt. The nightmares had not disappeared, but they no longer felt like chains pulling him backward. Instead, they had become quiet companions reminding him why every stone mattered. When darkness settled over Carter's Hollow, Logan spread his sleeping bag across the unfinished wooden floor instead of returning to the tent. There were no doors yet, no windows, only stone walls rising beneath the stars. Rex curled beside the future fireplace exactly as though they had already lived there for years. Logan listened to the autumn wind moving gently through the unfinished house. For the first time since losing everything, he did not feel like a homeless veteran sleeping inside a construction site. He felt like a homeowner waiting for tomorrow's sunrise. Spring returned to the driftless hills with gentle rain, fresh green hillsides, and mornings filled with birdsong, as Carter's Hollow slowly shed the appearance of abandoned land and began resembling a farm once more. When Logan Carter stepped outside the stone cottage at sunrise, he instinctively paused for a moment to breathe in the cool morning air. Less than a year earlier, he had awakened inside the cab of an aging pickup truck, never certain where he would park before nightfall. Now sunlight fell across a small front porch built with his own hands. Smoke drifted lazily from the stone chimney, and rows of carefully stacked limestone-bordered paths that had once been buried beneath weeds. The cottage was modest. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, a stone fireplace, a workshop attached to the eastern wall. Nothing about it suggested luxury. To Logan, it was priceless because every wall represented another reason not to give up. After breakfast, he grabbed his notebook, surveying tools, and shovel before walking toward the lower section of Carter's Hollow. Rex followed more slowly than he once had. The 9-year-old German shepherd still insisted on accompanying Logan everywhere, but his pace had changed. His once effortless stride had become measured. The silver around his muzzle appeared brighter each week, and although his alert amber eyes still watched every movement around the farm, they now carried a quiet wisdom earned through years of service instead of youthful intensity. Logan noticed every difference. He simply chose not to mention them. Robert Hale arrived shortly after sunrise, carrying 2 wooden stakes and a long measuring line. "Ready to make waterwork for you instead of against you?" the old mason asked. Logan smiled. "I've been waiting all winter." Although Robert's expertise centered on stone construction, decades spent restoring old farms had taught him that healthy buildings depended upon healthy land. Together they studied the property's natural slopes. Using the observations Logan had recorded during previous months, they marked a network of shallow drainage channels that would guide spring rain toward the lowest edge of the property instead of allowing stagnant pools to collect across the fields. For nearly 3 weeks, Logan worked from dawn until sunset. He dug drainage ditches, installed buried drainage pipe beneath problem areas, spread crushed agricultural lime to reduce the soil's acidity, mixed compost into ground that had been lifeless for decades. Every evening his shoulders burned with exhaustion. Every morning he started again. The work reminded him of military engineering projects overseas. The objective was different. The discipline remained the same. Thomas Bell continued arriving every Tuesday, now delivering compost, fencing supplies, seed, and replacement tool handles. "You've got half the county wondering what this place will look like next year," Thomas said while unloading another shipment. Logan wiped sweat from his forehead. "So do I." Thomas laughed. "That's probably the healthiest answer I've heard all month." Before leaving, Thomas handed Logan a small cloth bag. "My uncle grows barley." Inside rested several pounds of carefully selected seed. He said good neighbors share good harvests before they happen. Logan quietly thanked him. The gift meant more than its contents. It meant belonging. As April turned into May, Carter's Hollow began changing color. Tiny green shoots appeared across fields that had once reflected nothing but gray stone and stubborn weeds. At first only Logan noticed them. Then Robert noticed. Soon Thomas pointed them out every Tuesday. Eventually people driving past slowed their trucks simply to look. One Saturday morning, several neighboring farmers stopped along the fence line. Instead of staring in silence, they climbed out and introduced themselves. Some offered practical advice about Iowa weather. Others recommended better planting schedules. One elderly farmer traded a bag of clover seed for several limestone blocks Logan no longer needed. Nobody mentioned homelessness. Nobody mentioned PTSD. Nobody called him that veteran. They simply called him "Morning, Logan." The change was almost invisible, yet Logan felt it more deeply than anyone realized. Names mattered. Recognition mattered. Respect mattered. Late one afternoon, after finishing another section of fencing, Logan walked towards the porch carrying a bucket of tools. Halfway there, he noticed something unusual. Rex had stopped. The old shepherd stood quietly at the bottom of the 3 wooden porch steps. He looked upward, lifted one paw, paused, then climbed the first step. Stopped again. The second. Another's pause. Finally the third. Each movement required visible effort. Logan remained perfectly still. His heart tightened. Only months earlier, Rex had bounded onto the porch before Logan even reached the front door. Now age demanded patience. Rex looked almost embarrassed to have been noticed. Logan quietly set the bucket down. He knelt beside his oldest friend and gently scratched behind his ears. "You don't have to prove anything anymore." Rex rested his head against Logan's shoulder. That evening, Logan canceled the work he had planned for the next morning. Instead, he drove into Decorah. His destination was the local veterinary clinic. Dr. Emily Foster greeted him with a warm smile. Emily was 46 years old, with chestnut brown hair tied into a practical ponytail, kind green eyes behind thin-framed glasses, and a calm voice that immediately reassured anxious pet owners. Years of treating both farm animals and family pets had given her remarkable patience. Growing up on a dairy farm herself, she believed aging animals deserved dignity rather than pity, a lesson she often credited to the elderly border collie that had protected her family through childhood. After examining Rex carefully, she smiled gently. His heart sounds strong. Logan let out the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "But he's entering the later stage of his senior years," Emily continued. "His joints are stiff, especially after long days. That's normal for a dog his age, particularly one who spent years working as hard as he did." "What should I do?" "Don't stop letting him enjoy life." She looked down at Rex, who calmly wagged his tail. "Just let him enjoy it at his own pace." Driving home, Logan thought about those words. For months, he had measured progress in drainage ditches dug, stone walls completed, acres planted. Now another measurement quietly replaced them. How many mornings remained with Rex waiting outside the front door? How many evenings beside the fireplace? How many walks across Carter's Hollow? The barley fields would grow. The cottage would continue standing. More work would always wait tomorrow. His best friend would not. The following afternoon, instead of spending another 10 hours clearing rocks from the northern field, Logan carried 2 folding chairs onto the porch. He sat beside Rex, watching the spring wind ripple across the first green barley shoots. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. As sunlight settled over Carter's Hollow, Logan realized that rebuilding a farm had given him purpose. But slowing down long enough to share it with Rex, that was teaching him how to live. A warm summer breeze drifted across Carter's Hollow beneath a cloudless Iowa sky, carrying the scent of ripening barley through fields that had once been dismissed as worthless stone and lifeless soil. 2 years had passed since Logan Carter opened his eyes in a hospital bed, believing he had lost almost everything. Now, each sunrise revealed something entirely different. The stone cottage stood proudly near the center of the property, its limestone walls glowing softly beneath the morning light. A wide wooden porch overlooked the rolling fields, while smoke curled peacefully from the chimney on cool mornings. Beside the cottage stood a sturdy timber barn whose weathered oak beams had been raised by local craftsmen working alongside Logan during the previous autumn. Nearby, raised vegetable gardens overflowed with tomatoes, beans, squash, onions, and herbs. Split-rail fences stretched neatly across the property, enclosing healthy pasture where wildflowers now bloomed between carefully preserved limestone formations. The drainage channels Logan had dug years earlier quietly carried away seasonal rain, allowing broad waves of golden barley to sway beneath the wind instead of drowning beneath stagnant water. The farm no longer resembled abandoned land. It had become home. Logan walked slowly across the yard carrying a wooden crate filled with fresh vegetables destined for the Decorah farmers market. At 44, the hardships of the previous years had not disappeared from his face. His short, dark brown hair showed the first faint strands of gray near his temples, and the scar crossing his left eyebrow remained a permanent reminder of another lifetime. His injured knee still stiffened on damp mornings, but it no longer defined every step he took. He wore the same familiar clothes that had accompanied him through his darkest days. A red plaid flannel shirt beneath his worn brown canvas jacket whenever mornings turned cool. Dark blue jeans, sturdy brown hiking boots, and the scratched military watch that still faithfully marked each passing hour. Across the yard, Rex watched quietly from the porch. The 10-year-old German shepherd moved with slower, deliberate confidence now. His muzzle had grown noticeably whiter, and his powerful frame carried the gentle stiffness of age rather than the explosive energy of youth. Yet his amber eyes remained bright, thoughtful, and unwavering whenever they followed Logan across the farm. He no longer insisted on running every fence line each morning. Instead, he preferred greeting visitors from the porch before accompanying Logan at whatever pace his aging joints allowed. Logan never hurried him. He simply matched Rex's rhythm. As the years passed, Carter's Hollow became known throughout the surrounding countryside, not because hidden wealth had been discovered there. No one knew that secret except Logan, but because neglected land had been transformed through patience and honest work. Neighbors no longer arrived merely to satisfy curiosity. They came to exchange ideas. Young farmers asked about Logan's drainage system. Older landowners discussed crop rotation over coffee on the porch. Children still stopped to greet Rex before school. The farm had quietly become part of the community. One afternoon, Logan stood inside the cottage, studying the stone fireplace that had become the heart of the house. Above the mantel hung 2 carefully framed letters. One belonged to Benjamin Carter. The other contained Jacob Carter's final message copied from the fragile journal, while the original remained safely protected inside the restored underground cellar beneath its secure iron door. Benjamin's words read simply, "If you're still alive to read this, give yourself one more chance." Beside them rested 4 military dog tags. One belonged to Logan's first commanding officer. 3 belonged to the teammates who never returned from Afghanistan. Every evening before retiring for the night, Logan paused there for a quiet moment. Not because grief had disappeared, because gratitude had finally learned to stand beside it. He often wondered what those men would think if they could see Carter's Hollow now. Perhaps they would laugh at how the man once trained for combat now spent his days arguing with weeds, repairing fences, and worrying about rainfall. Perhaps they would simply be happy that he had survived long enough to discover peace. Late that afternoon, the final wagon load of barley from the season disappeared into the barn. Logan brushed dust from his hands before walking toward the porch where Rex already waited. The old shepherd slowly stood and met him halfway across the yard. Logan smiled. "You still insist on meeting me?" Rex answered by gently pressing against his leg. Together they settled into two familiar places. Logan lowered himself into the weathered wooden rocking chair he had built during the previous winter. Rex curled comfortably beside him, resting his silvered muzzle across Logan's boot. Neither of them looked toward the barn. Neither of them looked toward the hidden cellar. Instead, they watched the setting sun paint Carter's Hollow in shades of amber and gold. The barley fields rippled like quiet waves. Swallows skimmed low across the meadow. Somewhere beyond the pasture, children laughed while riding bicycles along the gravel road. For a long time, neither soldier nor dog moved. Logan thought back to the morning when smoke had filled the cab of his old pickup truck. He remembered believing his life had reached its final chapter. If that accident had never happened, he never would have met the people who had become family. He never would have discovered Benjamin's final gift. He never would have understood Jacob Carter's unfinished dream. Most importantly, he never would have learned that surviving and living were not the same thing. The hidden gold had certainly changed his circumstances. It had allowed Carter's Hollow to begin again. But gold alone could never have taught him patience. It could never have stood beside him during nightmares. It could never have run across a highway to save his life. It could never have delivered warm bread every Friday, shared barley seed between neighbors, or offered the wisdom of craftsmen who expected nothing in return. Only people could do that. Only loyalty could do that. Only love quietly expressed through ordinary kindness could transform a broken life. Logan reached down and gently rested one hand on Rex's neck. "You've carried me farther than any road ever could." Rex closed his eyes, content simply to remain beside the man he had protected through war, homelessness, heartbreak, and renewal. The sun finally disappeared behind the rolling Iowa hills. Shadows settled gently across Carter's Hollow. Logan looked once more toward the fields that had once been dismissed as useless. He smiled, not because he had found buried gold, but because he had finally discovered something infinitely more valuable. After many years of searching for a place where he belonged, he was home. Thank you for watching. Sometimes God's greatest miracles don't come as treasure. They come as a second chance, faithful friends, and the strength to begin again. Just as Carter's Hollow was restored, our lives can also be renewed when we refuse to give up and trust His plan. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment with "God is faithful," share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. May God bless you, protect your family, and fill your heart with peace. Thank you, and God bless you always.